For the last Saturday in October, you found the Georgia gang. And topping our agenda today, a runoff. Could it possibly happen in the governor's race? The governor asked for a special session at the state capitol, and there's another major indictment at Atlanta City Hall. Some of the stories up for grabs on the Georgia gang.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia gang starts now.
And we're glad you'll be with us on this Sunday. It's a busy week in politics. Our next to the last broadcast before the general election, November 6th. And to get things going this morning, leading us off is the Georgia gang's Lori Geary with a look at the week in politics.
Well, Dick, no real change in the polls this week in the race for Georgia governor. The most recent Fox 5 Opinion Savvy poll shows both Republican Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams tied at 48%. Their first fiery debate did little to move the numbers.
I'm the only candidate not only with a strong record of bipartisan leadership.
And I'll continue to streamline government, fight for our conservative values.
It was their first face-to-face matchup. All three candidates for governor making their pitch to Georgia voters. Democrat Stacey Abrams hit hard on the issue of voter suppression, blaming her Republican opponent, who is also Secretary of State.
Voter suppression isn't only about blocking the vote. It's also about creating an atmosphere of fear, making people worry that their votes won't count.
Her canvassers didn't fill the form out correctly. They couldn't get the last 4 digits of the social. We are following the law in Georgia.
To drive home his point, Kemp said an applicant named Jesus applied who lives on Heaven Street. Kemp went after Abrams on her decision to loan her campaign $50,000 instead of paying what she owes to the IRS.
Even in tough times, battling through a recession, my wife and I have always paid our taxes. That's what we do as Georgians.
You cannot defer responsibility for your family. I never failed to pay my bills. I pay the IRS. We have a payment plan.
Libertarian Ted Metz talked about legalizing marijuana. His poll numbers are low, but he could force Kemp and Abrams into a runoff, prolonging the election into December. While the latest Fox 5 Opinion Savvy poll shows a dead heat between Kemp and Abrams among likely voters, the independent voter numbers may give Republicans cause for concern. Abrams is up 50% to Kemp's 44%, with Metz at just under 2%. Independent voters who are undecided are only at 4%. And that's important because about 20% of voters in Georgia call themselves independents. And since 2002, many of them have skewed Republican, helping to give control of the governor's mansion to the GOP. Right now, this poll shows more independent voters are with Stacey Abrams than with Brian Kemp. Dick.
Thank you, Lori. And sometimes they call debates a fire drill. Lori, this one turned into one.
Not a lot of news that was made during this debate, and then right in the middle of it, as you heard, a fire alarm went off, and so they had to really delay it for quite a few minutes until they got that under control. Then they went right back at it.
And I think that fire drill should be a warning to Georgia's Republicans, Phil. Who thought, I'm going to be honest, at this stage of the campaign, that we'd be dead even?
Well, you know, a lot of the pundits and analysts and pollsters did think that, because if you remember in the last gubernatorial race, it was kind of tied 2 weeks out, and then all of a sudden Nathan Deal pulled ahead. I'd love to comment, too, on a little bit of the Opinion Savvy Fox 5 poll that Lori was discussing. There were 2 things that came to me. Yes, the independent vote has shrunk. And I was talking to Matt Towery Sr., of course, the longtime Fox 5 analyst who's now retired, but he said, you know, this is the most polarized race he's ever witnessed in the state of Georgia. That's why the independents are down. There's one other takeaway from the Opinion Savvy poll. Brian Kemp, the Republican, is doing far better if you look at the crosstabs with women. He has come up with women, and I think, as we've discussed before, it's a question of getting out the base of both parties. That's going to be the key to this election. I think the suburban women, Dick, we've talked about that. I don't think that's a factor right now. I think it's a factor of getting out your base.
Darren, I think this early voting is fascinating because all over the country, Republicans seem to have the edge in early voting, which you frankly would not expect. And is that a base vote coming out, or is that just a vote that's suddenly energized by the Kavanaugh hearings or some other factor, the caravan from Honduras, what have you?
Well, you know, as we as we sit here, 945,000 people have voted early. That's a 180% increase from 2014. If you really look at the racial makeup of it, 60% of the voters who have voted thus far, which also includes absentee ballots, are 60% white, 29% African American, and 54% female, 44% male. But one thing that really sticks out to me is 31% of the people who have early voted did not vote at all in 2014. So if you're in the Kemp camp right now, you're looking at, okay, while there is more white voters voting than African American, that's not shocking news because there's just more registered white voters and more white people who live in the state of Georgia. But you're looking to see, are these base voters who consistently turn out, are they new voters? I happen to think that the Abrams campaign has probably got an edge with the new voters because they've designated the resources to them. So if you're in the Abrams campaign right now, you're saying, okay, Alexis Scott, if you haven't voted yet, we're about to really flood your airways and knock at your door and make sure you go vote. But if Theron Johnson, who probably hypothetically never voted before and then voted in 2014, I show up on the voting rolls, that's a good sign for Abrams. So I kind of disagree a little bit with Phil. I think that all of us have been waiting for this opinion savvy poll. We've on this show for weeks, you know, kind of poo-pooed on other polls saying it wasn't weighed correctly. Well, here we are, 2 weeks to go. We got the opinion savvy poll, which Dick and Phil, you guys hang your hat on this poll, and it shows exactly what Alexis has been saying all along, that this race is tight. It's going to come down.
Let me turn to Alexis. I agree.
Yeah, it's going to come down
Let me turn to you, Alexis, because my props to you. You've kind of stuck with the viability of the Stacey Abrams candidacy from day one. One little number, though, that Theron mentioned in this early voting. I don't want to turn to a math professor here, but Theron said that 29% of those voting are African American. Stacey Abrams, I believe, needs something more like 32 or 33% African American vote to have a chance.
And she's going to get it. I mean, we still haven't had election day yet, and I think that the strategy she's going for is to get the early vote in, to get the absentee ballots out, to make sure that the votes get counted properly. And she also has a strategy of attracting those independent voters as well, because a lot of white voters will vote for her, and she needs to get about anywhere from 23 to 25% of the white vote, and they've always gotten 20% of the white vote.
And I think that seems doable, Phil. That's a little scary for Republicans if you consider that inside 285, most of those white voters are going to vote for Stacey Abrams.
Well, you know, let's remember that Donald Trump won by 5 points 2 years ago. He lost Metro Atlanta, but he won statewide. So the Kemp strategy is very good. He's out in the rural areas pumping up the rural vote. So we could lose, I say we, the Kemp campaign, the Republicans, all of that, could lose Metro Atlanta. However, I think they're eroding Stacey Abrams. I just pointed out a minute ago that he's doing far better with women. And that's the great takeaway from the poll. And you know, there's always been, and I love opinion savvy, but there's always been an underpolling of the rural voters. They missed it 2 years ago, and I'm wondering if there's a 1 or 2% point that they may have missed in rural Georgia.
But also, Stacey has taken her campaign tour bus of the state to all the rural places.
And that's good, and that's smart for her to do.
She may have registered more voters rurally.
Exactly, because she started in Albany. Before we launched the campaign.
Push for time here, let me make a quick point. The Republican Ted Metz has become kind of a folk hero.
Libertarian.
Oh, yes, thank you. The libertarian Ted Metz.
For legalizing marijuana.
Yeah, well, he's an expert in hemp. I mean, he gave a lecture on hemp at the end of it.
He's forward-thinking.
Pretty astounding. I thought I was listening to
it. Fascinating. He was talking about the economic and all the uses of hemp and all those things you can do.
It's a growing trend.
That's a real burning issue.
Yeah. I thought he was an agriculture professor at Georgia Southern. But anyway, he could force a runoff. I hate to say it.
Well, that's exactly where I was going. So while Phil likes to tell us that Donald Trump won by 45 points, let's not forget he only got 50.8% of the vote, roughly about, let's say, 51%. So if Ted Metz continues to stay at that 3 to 4% range, and if either candidate fails to get to 50%, I think that it also shows that it's just this very lack of attraction to both parties. I think a lot of folks are refusing to say who they're going to vote for and what party affiliation they are. And so Ted Metz could very well, if he finds some money and decides to campaign, he could very well force this to a runoff.
Well, he has no platform whatsoever. He's a joke. Fortunately, I know a lot of articulate libertarians. He's not one of them. And I think that Trump's approval rating, you forgot to mention to the viewers there, and is 51%. In Georgia, that is right where the Republicans want it to be.
But he said, don't tell me what
ballot.
to do. Leave me alone and don't steal my stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
who
don't
disagrees
steal
with
my
that?
stuff. I
Who
thought that was-
disagrees with that?
And I was sort of with him until he gave the lecture on hemp. I thought I was in a 6th grade geography class. Okay, when we come back, more on the governor's race, and we'll probably focus on the whole notion of voter suppression. We'll be right back.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
A lot of what Stacey Abrams talked about in the debate this past week on Georgia Public Television involved this general notion of voter suppression, making it more difficult for people to vote. We've said on the broadcast before there were more lawsuits than you could count. But I think the bottom line of all this, a federal judge this week said that I guess all those absentee ballots have got to be recognized and voted.
Even if there's misspellings or wrong errors on them.
Signatures
now,
and stuff.
Also, the Attorney General, and we don't know what's happened as we tape, the Attorney General has gone in to try to get a stay of that liberal judge's ruling.
But the point is, I think Brian Kemp said everybody gets to vote.
Yeah, but he said that, and let's be fair to him, because I know his folks, made this clear all week long that they want to say that he said that these 53,000 people who are on this exact match list could vote. But this is where I think the advocacy that we saw from a lot of the civil rights groups, a lot of the advocacy groups filing lawsuits, put the pressure out there, and also they control the public narrative that we should be making it easier to vote in Georgia, not harder. And I think that's where Judge May basically ruled to say, hey, we're going to count all these ballots and make sure that folks get the opportunity to vote.
And more people have been registered in Georgia than ever before, so it's a myth.
Yeah,
Well,
but the one thing I want to push back on, no, but it's not.
It's a way to stir up the black vote. That's all it is.
But
Not meaningful.
it's not shocking
Everybody
news.
gets to vote.
No, it's not shocking news that more people register to vote. We have more population, Phil, and so of course, more
as long
people
as you
register to
have
vote.
your voter ID and applicable ID, you're going to be fine.
All right,
Well,
let's
it'll be fine. I'm convinced that it's going to be fine. Thank you, Phil.
Of course, in a real tight race, however,
yeah.
you're going to have to count all those provisional ballots at
That's
some
right.
point,
And
which
we'll
I think is the point worth looking at, huh?
Yeah, we'll see.
All right,
Indeed.
Governor Deal this week called for a special session of the General Assembly to convene after the election, and it's about hurricane relief on the surface. That damage was severe, and the governor wants to get relief to South and Southwest Georgia more quickly than waiting until January. In other words, revise the current budget. That makes sense to me.
It does, but you're right about what else is going to happen. Also tacked on is a fuel tax exemption for Delta, and I think that'll be controversial. What else is going to be tacked on? It looks like, are we going to have a Christmas tree
I'll
here?
tell you one. Senator Fran Miller of North DeKalb, Dunwoody, has asked the governor to put into his call a rollback of the DeKalb County Commissioners' pay raise they gave themselves.
Well, there we go. The governor
Remember that
does have to
whopping
specify.
60% outrageous pay raise they gave themselves? Governor Miller wants the General Assembly to consider knocking that back to 10. And what happened was, remember, it passed the Senate, but it died in the House because all those DeKalb representatives eventually want to make that salary if they can. And so,
well, it's supposed to be for a week. If people like Fran Miller and others want to tack on other things and get the governor to go along with it, it could go on for more than a week.
Governor Deal, more good news this week. He announced that BlackRock, which I always thought of as a venture fund, a big holding fund, will bring 1,000 jobs to Atlanta. Once again, Georgia Tech seems to be part of the draw. That's pretty good news. And Keisha Lance Bottoms this week revised yet again the deal for the Gulch. And I don't want to get too bogged down in the financing, but Theron, it shortens the tax abatement period, and it has the developers, CIM Properties, put in more money, more risk.
And they have basically more responsibility to do the right thing for the city and taxpayers. I think that what you saw this week was leadership from this mayor. She now owns this Gulch deal. It was it's a much better deal than what it was before this council and this mayor took office. And so I think that as we sit here, the council members have received the revised piece of legislation, and so they've got it electronically. They've gotten paper copies, so there shouldn't be any excuse this time around that they didn't have enough time.
I'm glad to hear you say it was flawed under Mayor Kasim Reed.
No, I didn't say that.
That's
no,
good to hear.
You're not going to misquote me when I'm saying.
Because you just said that now it's making it better.
Well,
but
it's better because of the leadership of the mayor, because she heard the constituents, she heard the council members. So now I'm pointing out is that you now have 2 weeks. You're going to have a special work session this week to really get into the crux of the deal, to get into the details, and then it'll be up for a full council vote hopefully on November 5th.
All right, let's talk about the corruption scandals at City Hall. More indictments this week, this time of Mayor Kasim Reed's former political fixer type, Mitzi Bickers, indicted for attempting to bribe officials in Jackson, Mississippi over water and construction projects over there.
Right.
I think, Alexis, they squeezed her. She won't cooperate. She wants to stand trial, so they threw this other indictment on her.
Right.
To put more pressure on, huh?
That's what I think, but I don't know if it's going to work because it doesn't have anything to do with the city of Atlanta. It has to do with Jacksonville, and not Jacksonville, but Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah.
So
well, it has to do with racketeering and conspiracy, and the BJ Pack, the U.S. Attorney, has very clearly said publicly that there'll be more indictments coming.
And another intriguing little note in the corruption case: a subpoena to City Hall for records of an accident involving Mayor Kasim Reed's car operating under the blue lights. The story that Lori Geary made famous. She's almost has to be a reckless driver to have followed Kasim at all those speeds. But I guess they're looking for settlements that weren't reported and made public, huh? Is that how you read it?
Well, yeah, I think that makes sense.
Along the same ways some settlements were made of high-ranking city officials, huh?
Right, and of course the whole spotlight comes on, why should an official like this have this carte blanche to speed through red lights and endanger the public? That was the main point, too.
All right, well, when we come back, we will turn back to politics. We'll look at a congressional race or two, and yes, we're going to do the amendments. I promise. Stay with us.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
And we've been watching 2 congressional races in the state of Georgia. There are more than that, but there are 2 that are very competitive. Let's look this week at the race in the 6th district between Lucy McBath on the Democratic side and the incumbent Congresswoman Karen Handel, the Republican. Heavy TV on both sides. All kinds of serious accusations. Handel is essentially saying that McBath doesn't live in Georgia, even though she had a homestead exemption here. McBath is accusing, I find it very strange, she's all over Handel as being anti-abortion, which just isn't true. We've known Karen Handel's long public career.
But she's got that.
She's narrowly pro-choice, huh?
From working with Susan Komen. That's where she got that handle from.
But it just seems much. It's not.
Well, the TV ad wars are really good on both sides. There's some good ads, I have to say, objectively. I think it is tightening. The last internal polling I heard was that Karen Handel is up. Going back to the early voting, living in North Fulton, there is a heavy early Republican vote. And it just as an aside, statewide, you've got areas where you have Republican incumbents for the Senate and House not running, and yet you've got thousands of Republicans, because you can tell when they vote in a primary what party, are turning out. So I think my prediction is Karen Handel will be okay.
But I think that if you look at Lucy McBath's ads and really her campaign, I mean, she's really, I think, bringing a level of humanization to issues around pre-existing conditions. You know, the unfortunate murder of her son has not only.
But she isn't campaigning. She didn't show up at public events.
No, she's campaigning.
She skipped the forum and done. The biggest one in North DeKalb. She has a no-show. She's a carpetbagger, and she can't figure out how to move in the district.
But I think the majority of voters who are watching television, who are getting her mail, who is hearing the radio ads, they see a woman that basically is a new-time candidate, and I think that she's putting a little bit more pressure than people expected in this race. And I think that the other thing is that
If Michael Bloomberg gives you $3 million, you can put a lot of pressure on.
But I think that it really forced the Handle campaign to really take her more seriously. And I think that district, one of the things we hadn't talked about, look at the early voting numbers in Congressional District 6 and 7. Those numbers are up, and so the Abrams and Kemp campaign are not only the campaigns that are actually driving people
so far, those are Republican numbers. Now we got another week to go.
What about the rest of the statewide ticket? Sarah Riggs Amico is on TV. Jeff Duncan's on TV.
John Barrow
Barrow's on TV, and he says he won't bite.
Yeah. That was a good ad. I think it's very competitive between Brad Raffensperger and John Barrow. I think we all ought to look at that on election night.
Well, certainly John Barrow has the name recognition, I think, better than...
Over in Augusta and Savannah, particularly.
There's a new entry in the TV sweepstakes, a public service commissioner named Lindy Miller. Attractive, well-spoken.
She should just be a viable candidate. Let's not throw the attractive in there. She's just a viable candidate.
But she's got $1 million
for PSC.
She's got $1 million, but I don't see her that viable.
And she's obviously attractive on some issues too, because her opponent has voted for rate increases.
But I think when I say it's viability, she's put in the hard work. She's raised the money. You know, a lot of folks don't really talk about PSC races a lot. They're so far down the ballot. So, with all the stuff that's been going on, I think when I say she's viable, meaning she's gone out in this climate and really made people attracted to this race and has raised enough money.
But she agrees with the Republican to continue Plant Vogel.
But you don't hear much about the other PSC race.
And I want to change to another congressional race in District 12 with Francis Johnson, who was the head of the state NAACP. He might get some, coattail action from Stacey Abrams.
Fine young man, very smart, very bright, great lawyer, did a lot for the NAACP.
Let's hit the amendments very quickly. The one that I'm almost positive will pass is Marcy's Law. Right. Because millions are being spent on it. I think the Kelsey Grammer commercial and the various women who have been assaulted, especially that poor woman who was assaulted with the acid.
Yes, terrible.
I think
that's Amendment number 4.
That's 4.
That's 4.
What other highlights, Phil?
Well, let's go with the first one, and it sounds pretty good. I think it deserves a yes vote. It's called the Outdoor Stewardship Trust
I'm for
Fund.
that.
Yeah, it's to protect drinking water. We're all in favor of that. I got one that Alexis and I, believe it or not, hold on to your hats here. We agree on Amendment 2, don't we?
I think we do, and but maybe for different reasons.
Well, there's one big reason I think we agree. It's a statewide business court. And I'm not opposed to a business court. There are veterans courts and there are drug courts that have gone pretty well. But I don't like the fact that this would be an appointed judgeship by the governor. I want elected, so there's more accountability.
Right.
Are we okay on that
one? 2 more highlights.
2 more highlights. Amendment 3, forest land conservation use property tax revisions.
They want to tax all the trees consistently.
Grants to the forest land conservation use. And number 5, that's sales and use tax referendum by a school district, and it would authorize a referendum for a sales and use tax. Sounds good to me.
Oh, okay. Higher taxes, more taxes. Huh?
It's a special tax that people can sway yes or no, rather than having it imposed by liberals.
Oh, please.
All right, we got to get out.
I think you're wrong on
When
that.
we come back, we'll do winners and losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
And I want to begin with a sentiment that I know is shared by all of us. The tragic shooting death of Gwinnett police officer Antoine Toney. Seemed like a terrific young guy, just gunned down, awful. And it just reminds us of the perils of the people who are our first responders. Phil.
Well, he's my winner too, and it reminds us that we need to inculcate, especially young people, more respect for law enforcement. I've got my winner is that fire alarm that y'all were talking about at the beginning of the program during the Atlanta Press Club debate. And that was the only excitement, really, in my opinion, for the debate. No one really made any news. It was they had a good back and forth, and yes, it was fiery. And I thought the rebuttal time
fiery in a polite way, kind of. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it was kind of polite.
Well, and also the rebuttal time was screwed up by the moderators, so that was bad. And Stacey Abrams is my loser, and I'm sorry. You know, criminal gangs are a crisis here in this state. She claims she voted to try to control the gangs. I tell you, Burt Reeves and Rich Golick, 2 very respected lawmakers, called foul on that. She voted no against going after the criminal gangs.
Seems pretty clear, yeah. Okay, Theron.
So my first winner is going to be Terry Lee, who was announced a couple weeks ago by Mayor Bottoms as the new Chief Housing Officer for Atlanta. So we know that affordable housing is at the top of the list as far as the mayor's agenda. She campaigned on it, and that's something that she's working with the public and the private businesses to make sure that folks in Atlanta have affordable housing. Definitely want to echo everyone's sentiment about Antoine Tony. It was tragic what happened to him. So my thoughts and my prayers go out to him and his entire family. And also want to compliment the Atlanta, all the police departments that came together to basically find the 2 suspects who were involved in that incident. And then lastly, you know, Phil, a couple weeks ago, you know, I think probably jinxed our dogs, and they went down to LSU and lost. And so I hope that the dogs go down to Jacksonville and beat Florida this week.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, but we won't know. All right, Alexis.
Okay, I'm going to salute Teresa Hightower, who died this week. She's a local Atlanta singer, longtime popular attraction at the Ritz-Carlton Buckhead.
Nice jazz singer.
Wonderful, wonderful singer and wonderful human being. Also, let's see, this Marcus Jewish Community Center Book Fair is underway.
Big deal.
And they got a lot of big names coming. They had Sally Field last week, and they got Tom Hanks coming in and Kenny Leon on his book, so that should be exciting. And I guess I need to wrap it up, but Stacey Abrams is my winner. She won that debate with substance.
Well, you could argue that. All right. Sad news, Tata Martino, Gerardo Martino, the manager of the great Atlanta United soccer team, is leaving. He really accomplished something. He built something up totally from scratch. And as we speak on this weekend, they have a chance to win the overall title in Major League Soccer. And my losers this week are all the carpetbaggers. It's a new phenomenon in Georgia, and we ought to watch it. Stacey Abrams, all that money from out of state, lots of other candidates like that. It's a new breed of carpetbagger. And we'll see you next week on the Georgia Gang.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.